5th of July, 1943, Hitler finally gives the order to attack. It's the moment of truth for the Tigers.
Altitude 0.228.6.
By the end of day one, Wittmann has destroyed 15 enemy tanks and anti-tank guns. Hitler's Tiger is a deadly success.
They need us! He's starting to fire!
In terms of effectiveness of killing enemy tanks, of destroying enemy tanks, the Tiger was very effective. Kill ratios were very high.
After 5 days fighting, the Tiger helps German forces advance up to 30 kilometers. But despite the carnage, the Soviet T-34s keep coming.
The problems the Germans have on the Eastern Front is just the vast numbers they come up against. It seems to be never ending. It's sort of a bit like the Hydra's head. You chop one off and 6 more appear.
Lieutenant, there are thousands of them.
Listen to my orders, repeat them, otherwise stay silent. Concentrate, that way we might stay alive.
While Germany is creating their hand-built masterpiece, Soviet tractor factories have been churning out thousands of T-34s. The high-tech Tiger is massively outnumbered. It's also worryingly high maintenance.
It was very mechanically complex. It was also very heavy, which meant that it had problems with its engine, transmission, and suspension, which caused it to have lots of breakdowns.
Like many of the Tigers sent to Kursk, Wittmann's tank is not being defeated by the enemy, but by its own complex engineering.
German records indicate that about as many tanks were destroyed by their own crews to avoid capture after they'd broken down or been damaged than were engaged and destroyed by enemy fire.
Germany has too few Tigers to break through Soviet lines 100 kilometers deep. After losing 54,000 men and over 250 armored vehicles, Hitler abandons the Kursk offensive.
Kursk is the last time the Germans go forward on the Eastern Front. It's the last time they go forward in Soviet territory. From then on, they're always on the back foot.
Building the biggest tank of the war has not brought Hitler victory on the battlefield. Yet Nazi Germany celebrates the achievements of their new supertank and its heroic commanders like Michael Wittmann.
Nazi Germany is a highly militarized society, and individuals are fated in a way that they're not really in America and certainly not in Britain, for example. So the cult of the ace is a big thing.
So how is it possible for one man to destroy 117 tanks? What is your secret?
Concentration, my Führer.
And the hunter's instinct, I suspect. So, how are things at the front? Are the Tigers everything you had hoped for?
The Tiger is the very best tank in the world. In open country, the enemy flees as soon as he sees us.
Despite losing the Battle of Kursk, the successes of individual Tigers convince Hitler that big is better. To him, the next step is logical. Germany will build the first true mega-tank.
The idea of a mega-tank ranging somewhere between 100 and 250 tons was circulating in the whole continent of Europe for about 30 years. Nearly every major land had one or two designs of this in their drawers.
Now, designers bombard the Führer with rival plans, including a jaw-dropping design, 10 times larger than any tank in existence. The largest Nazi tank design, known as the Landkreuzer, is dreamt up by a submarine designer at Krupp Steel.
Krupp has suggested to me a magnificent tank, a 1,000-ton monster with a battleship gun. We can use it to replace destroyed defense bunkers. Get Herr Grote at Krupp on the telephone.
This is the only plan that exists of this vehicle. If you look at this design and consider all dimensions, it's basically a ship on land. The height of this tank would be 11 meters. That's roughly the size of a 4-story house. And the overall length of the whole design would be up to 39 meters.
The Landkreuzer is a tank supersized beyond practical use. Realizing this, Armaments Minister Albert Speer shuts the project down. But Hitler's desire to build a mega-tank is unstoppable. He turns to Dr. Porsche. This legendary car designer failed in his bid to build the Tiger, but now he has a shot at redemption.
He still believed that Porsche was basically a genius, and maybe this time something very good, something very new would come out with far more battlefield power than the other classical designs.
What would be the purpose of such a tank?
Nothing could stop a land battleship of this size. Of course, it would not travel alone, but with an escort of smaller armored vehicles. It also seems to me we could use some steel bunkers. Suppose one of our concrete bunkers was knocked out. This steel monster could quickly plug the gap again and again.
This new steel monster will be called the Mouse. It's a monumental engineering challenge, and Porsche cannot afford to let his Führer down again.
Everything Porsche had to build into this tank, according to the demands of Hitler, was a problem on a much, much bigger scale than before. This is the first design Porsche proposed in June 1942. It's the classical German tank on a new scale. The whole thing was roughly double the size of a Tiger, but it still wasn't enough for Hitler.
With Porsche failing to deliver the colossal scale he wants, Hitler gets even more hands-on. He specifies the exact length and diameter of the gun and the thickness of the armor for his dream tank.
So this is the final mouse, and this design now, with the demands Hitler made over the time, weighs in at 188 tons. This means the first mouse was as heavy as 2 Tigers, and they added just a 3rd Tiger.
On the 14th of May 1943, Hitler and Porsche gather at the Wolf's Lair to view a wooden model mouse. After disappointing Hitler with his Tiger prototype, Porsche knows another failure could be disastrous.
So, can we build such tanks?
Of course, mein Führer, we can build such tanks.
We must now plan ahead for achieving superiority in 1944. This year, the Tiger and the Panther are the best. Next year, the Mouse and the Tiger too must be the best. This is fantastic.
The giant mouse is irresistible to Hitler. Porsche's super tank will be built.
Everything he does leads towards vastness. Vast underground bunkers, vast guns, vast tanks. Hitler absolutely buys into the idea that big is better.
But creating this giant tank presents Porsche with huge technical challenges. The Germans had tried building a massive mobile gun several years earlier. A weapon called the Schwer Gustav, which dwarfed Porsche's vision for the Maus. It's a valuable lesson in the pitfalls of building big. A piece of this gun still survives. One of its shells.
What strikes me first when I look at this grenade is the enormous size of it. Almost 4 meters long, it weighs about 5,000 kilograms. It could inflict enormous damage. It could penetrate 10 meters concrete. It could penetrate a steel plate of 1 meter thick. When this thing fired, you got firepower indeed.
Completed in 1942, the Gustav weighed over 1,300 tons. The gun was so big that the only way to move it was on its own dedicated railway. And transporting it to the battlefront was a mammoth undertaking.
It took 25 trains to bring all the equipment, all the installations of the Schwer Gustav. It took about 2 to 3 months before it was ready to fire in June 1942. There were 2,500 people needed to build the tracks for the gun, to assemble the gun, and to fire the gun.
Once in position, the Gustav required vast amounts of manpower and resources to operate. The giant gun couldn't swivel, so new railway tracks were laid to point it in the right direction. In all, it took 90 days to prepare the gun for firing. And it was only used once, against the Soviet city of Sevastopol.
It was able to destroy some heavy fortifications, but at a price. It could fire 48 shots and then its barrel was worn out completely.
Propelling its 5-ton shells at supersonic speeds had wrecked the barrel.
It needs enormous maintenance to keep it in working order. And because of its dimensions, of course, it's very vulnerable to air attacks. Was the Schwer Gustav a successful weapon? In the end, you have to answer no.
When building the Maus, Porsche has to mount a large gun on the biggest tank ever built. Unlike the Gustav, though, it has to be practical and maneuverable. And crucially, it must deliver Hitler the lethal killing power he craves. The Führer desperately needs weapons that can reverse the crushing losses in Russia. Weapons capable of striking fear into his enemies.
Most Germans know that the war is not going to be won from 1943 onward. But Hitler is still clinging on to this 1,000-year Reich concept. And because he's always been such a technology buff, he starts to put increased amount of faith in wonder weapons. You know, whether they be rockets or jet aircraft or even, you know, mouse tanks.
Kummersdorf, Germany. It's here that Hitler's giant Maus prototypes will be stored. In 1935, at this top-secret base, Hitler had been wowed by Panzer I's weighing 6 tons.
This is it. This is what I want.
Now, Kummersdorf will house a tank 36 times bigger.
This building is the building that housed the 2 German Panzer VIIs, the Maus. This was where all of their new weapons were tested and made sure that they met the specifications. But just the sheer size of where they parked these tanks is really impressive to see.
Hitler and the Nazis have high hopes for the Maus tanks stored here.
They were hoping that this would be a wonder weapon, that this would be of such, you know, a large moving fortress that could defeat anything in its path.
But before Hitler can use the Maus in combat, its inventor, Dr. Porsche, must get it mobile. Despite his disaster with the Tiger tank, he still has faith in his pioneering diesel-electric engine. Tests could prove him right.
The pressure on the tracks was so good, so well distributed on the ground, that the tank actually was able to reach 15 to 20 kilometers per hour on the open terrain. Porsche managed to design the interior of the Maus so that this humongous, cumbersome, real big tank moves like a normal car, basically. And everybody who could drive a car could basically drive a Maus. From an engineering point of view, regarding the steering of the Maus, it's a masterpiece.
Porsche's Maus is a technical triumph, but possibly not the most practical combat vehicle.
Every bridge the Maus would have tried to go over would have been broken down by it, so the Maus had to go through rivers. For that, you had to build a snorkel on the Maus, keep every hole in the Maus shut, and connect it to another Maus, because a Maus had this typical Porsche diesel electromotor, which wasn't able to function underwater. The Maus would go through the water, and then the Maus on the other side would give her energy to the second Maus, which go through the water then.
On dry land, the Maus proves an astonishing gas guzzler. It burns a liter of diesel every 30 meters, at a time when fuel is increasingly scarce. The Nazi high command are divided about whether to go into full production. But the war won't wait. In June 1944, the Allies invade Normandy. Within a week, they've advanced deep inland. To fight back, the Nazis must rely on their original super tank, the Tiger, and aces like Michael Wittmann. Near a village called Villers-Bocage, Wittmann is sent to observe Allied tank movements.
They think they have won the war already.
Let's prove them wrong.
Wittmann has found an entire tank formation napping. He decides to attack with just one Tiger.
Platoon, point 2 to 8.6.
So he just goes down on a parallel road and just goes boom, 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 taking out one after the other. And the space of 15 minutes in his own tank has destroyed, has taken out between 12 and 13 British tanks, and the same number again of vehicles.
It's one of the most devastating single-handed attacks of the war, and earns ice-cold tank ace Wittmann even greater fame in Nazi Germany.
People like Wittmann did something good for their army concerning morale, but then again, they actually distracted from the truth of the industrial warfare.
Germany simply hasn't built enough tanks. In World War II, they produced over 1,300 Tigers, compared to 50,000 Shermans built by the United States. 2,000 of these Shermans are given extra big guns to destroy Tigers. They are called Sherman Fireflies.
The genius idea about the Firefly is you're using the same tank that's already in mass production. So to support it, you don't need any new spare parts because it's using two things that are already in existence. A 17-pounder gun, which the artillery have, and a Sherman tank.
The Firefly will prove Wittmann's nemesis. On the 8th of August, 1944, a Firefly gunner spots Wittmann's distant Tiger. Just one shot penetrates the Tiger's armor, ignites its ammo, and incinerates Wittmann and his crew.
What Wittmann's test tells us is that this idea of building super heavy, super complicated wonder weapon tanks didn't work out because the Americans just took their normal mass-produced medium tank, improved it, and killed Wittmann and his Tiger.
As the Allies close in from east and west, defeat for Nazi Germany creeps nearer. At Kummersdorf, Ferdinand Porsche continues to test his mouse. But only 2 prototypes are ever made, and the mouse halls are never finished.
The mouse was a marketing trick. It was to keep people believing in this silly war, in this vicious war, even when everything was lost. And it was obvious to everybody that things are lost.
In March 1945, the Soviets reach Germany and discover 2 abandoned mouse tanks close to Kummersdorf. They would go on to test the mouse, but concluded that it had little practical use. No tank this big would ever be built again.
I would say that the mouse was an evolutionary dead end in terms of tank development because it didn't have the mobility necessary to accomplish really anything practical on the modern battlefield.
The mouse, like the Gustav gun, was a weapon supersized far beyond the practical. The result of Hitler's love of the very, very big.